He says, take it, distribute the money among the poor, your money among the poor, take up your cross and follow me, and you'll have treasures in heaven. And so he could do that. You could do that. That's why I tell you, never begrudge doing anything for the Lord. Any offering you ever give, you ought to be giving gratefully and giving out of a sense of nothing I do for God. Not one cup of water that I give to one of his servants is ever forgotten by God. So this is what he's saying. You've done all these things. Your gold and silver is cankered, and the rest of them shall be a witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as it were fire. You know, they held on to it, and God says it's going to be the source of your destruction. You're holding on to it. Imagine if the gold and silver was radioactive. And they're holding on to it. I'm not going to let it go. And it's just burning in their hands, eating away at their hands. He says, you're trying so hard to hold on to it. And he says, it's going to kill you in the end. It's going to destroy you in the end. You have heaped treasures together for the last days. They thought they were heaping up gold and silver and stuff for the last days. But James's point was, well, you're storing something up. In fact, the Bible talks about it. He says they store up for themselves wrath against the day of wrath and the revelation of the righteous judgment of God. He says instead of storing up treasures, you're storing up something, all right. You're storing up wrath against the day of wrath and the revelation of the righteous judgment of God. In verse 4 he says, behold, the hire of the laborers who have reaped down your fields, which of you is kept back by fraud, crieth, and the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. In other words, you've got these guys out there in the field working for you that you promised that you would pay them, but you cheated them. When it came time to pay them, you didn't pay them. You put it in your storehouse and let them, nothing they could do to fight you. You had the power, you had the wealth. And he says, but I want you to know the hire of those people, what they was supposed to have. Remember what the Bible says when Cain killed Abel? God says, the blood of Abel cries to me out of the ground. It's crying out for vengeance. He said, the hire of that you kept back from them, that you defrauded them of. He said, it's crying out to God for justice. And God hears it. And he said, and the cries of those people that said, oh God, intervene for me. Intervene for me. I've been cheated. He said, their cries have entered into the ears. And notice what James said. I told you, James is straightforward. He's tough, man. He says, their cries have entered into the ears, not of God, but he calls God something specific. He says, they've entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. Not the Sabbath, the Lord of Sabaoth. And what that means is the Lord of hosts, the Lord of the armies. And what he's talking about is, he's saying, you've done this and they had no power against you, but God is coming with his army. And God is going to execute vengeance for what you've done against these people. So the picture when he says they've entered the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth is the picture of a general or a king in front of a mighty army that's on its way. On its way to judge you for what you've done to these poor people. We read in the Old Testament accounts of that happening. Remember when Lot and his family were stolen away, and how that the Bible says Abraham gathered his servants together and went after them. This is what James is painting a picture. He says, oh, you've got God and his army. And you look at what the Bible says. Look at what Jude said. Remember, Jude said, Enoch, the seventh from Adam, way back then prophesied and said, I beheld the Lord coming with myriads of his saints. And he was coming to execute judgment. This is what James is saying. Their cries have entered into the Lord of Sabaoth, and he's coming with his armies. And that's a tough. You see, you've got this man that's stronger than this man, and he's taking from this man, but somebody stronger than him is coming to take up the cause of the one that's being done wrong. You've lived in pleasure on the earth. I'm going to do 2 more verses and then we're going to stop. Ye have lived in pleasure on the earth and have been wanton. Ye have nourished your hearts as in a day of slaughter. He's talking to these rich men. You've lived in pleasure on the earth and been wanton. You've just given yourselves completely over to this luxurious lifestyle. You've lived in pleasure. Remember the story Jesus told? He fared sumptuously every day, clothed in purple and fine linen. He's partying. I imagine him, all the celebration parties, and the people as they leave the rich man's party pass right by that guy, the poor old Lazarus. He says, "Ye have lived in pleasure on the earth and been wont to live luxuriously, and ye have nourished your hearts as in a day of slaughter." There's 2 things that I like to say about it. The first one's probably more correct than the second one, but I'm going to mention the second one anyway. But when an army came in and they destroyed a city, you remember seeing these old Viking tales where they would come in and they would destroy the city and they would plunder. You know, after the battle's over, then they're eating the people's food and they're stealing what the people had. They've killed them all, and they says, you've nourished yourselves as in a day of slaughter. In other words, you've ran over everybody. You've hurt everybody. And then you sit there like that man who's won a battle and you nourish yourself on what you took from other people. You nourish yourself as in a day of slaughter. The other one is I use illustrations sometimes that it's like the old turkey that in October and September they're just feeding him twice. They put him in his own pen, give him twice as much food as all the other turkeys. And he's sitting over there going, "Ooh, I must be special. I've got this nice place all to myself and they're giving me twice as much as you other turkeys." And he doesn't realize that the reason why September and October they're giving him all of this extra food is because November is coming and Thanksgiving is coming and they're planning on eating. He said, you've nourished yourself as in a day of slaughter. You've nourished yourself, but the day of slaughter is coming. And you think you're doing something, but all you're doing is storing up for yourself wrath against the day of wrath, the revelation of the righteous judgment of God. The final verse I'll leave you with tonight, verse 6, "Ye have condemned and killed the just, and he doth not resist you." Well, they did that with Jesus. You know, they did that with all of these. Remember what he said earlier, James said, you treat these rich people good, and it's the rich people that are abusing you. You know, if a rich man comes into your assembly, you say, "Oh, sit here in this place of honor." And he says, "The rich men have always done you wrong." And he says, "Look at all the Christians that have been done by all the evil that's been done by people sitting on their thrones, pronouncing judgment against them. And they stand there like Jesus as a sheep led to the slaughter. Nothing said." And he says, "You've done all these things to them and condemned them, but your condemnation's coming. Your day of judgment's coming." He's warning them, saying, listen, you need to rethink the way you're handling your life. You act like it's always going to be this way, but a day of judgment is coming. And so consider that. Consider meeting God. Consider what's going to take place. Any comments or questions before we close out?